titled A Conversation on Conservation, Reassessing Challenges, Opportunities, and Commitments for Biodiversity Conservation. Before we start, we kindly request all participants to rename yourself in the format that you are seeing on your screen. As you can see here, we ask you to rename yourselves to reflect the name of your institution. For a smoother flow and a more enjoyable experience of the event, kindly take note of the following reminders. As you can see in this slide, number 1, please note that the proceedings are being recorded. Please be mindful of your microphones and video cameras throughout the program, and kindly use the chat function for your questions. Good morning once again, everyone. Welcome to A Conversation on Conservation. My name is Eman Delocado from the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability and SDSN Philippines, and I shall serve as your moderator for this morning. This webinar is jointly organized by 3 networks of Sustainable Development Solutions Network, or SDSN, namely SDSN Philippines, SDSN Hong Kong, and SDSN Southeast Asia. Also, the event is co-organized by the Chinese University of Hong Kong, the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability, the Ateneo Biodiversity Research Laboratory, and United in Diversity Foundation. We are joined right now by 120 plus participants from Asia and beyond. To capture this moment, we shall take a group photo. Just so we can see your smiles this morning, if you can, please turn on your camera so that we can take our photo. Mark?
Hi everyone. So we are many today, so let's warm up our jaws. I'll take the picture of frame 1. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, frame 2. 1, 2, 3. Frame 3. 1, 2, 3. Fourth frame. Okay, 1, 2, 3. And the last. 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much, sir. Back to you.
Thank you, Mark. For everyone, for our participants, feel free to keep your camera on, but of course, feel free to turn it off as well, depending on your bandwidth. And thank you once again for joining us this morning. This webinar will feature an opening plenary on the global biodiversity challenges. This will be followed by 3 talks on different challenges and initiatives on conserving biodiversity in terrestrial, aquatic, and urban ecosystems. After which, the 3 speakers will engage in a panel discussion exploring how biodiversity conservation can be advanced. Just to provide context of our discussion, our lively discussion this morning shall mention 2 pertinent documents essential in addressing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These 2 are the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, or the KMGBF, and the Pact of the Future. 2 years ago, global leaders adopted an exhaustive pathway of promoting harmonious relationships with nature by 2050. Known as the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, the momentous pathway identifies sustainable use of biodiversity and ecosystems and stopping human-induced extinctions as key targets. The framework also aims to leverage resources to ensure that mechanisms for attaining the framework goals are well funded. This is lauded, the particular framework is lauded because it sees biodiversity issues not just as a scientific issue or an environmental issue, but as an economic, and sociopolitical one as well. And later, we will hear from our speakers how biodiversity initiatives are not just scientific in nature, but delves into the reality of the society and economy. The second one, which we shall be hearing a lot in the next few weeks, is the Pact of the Future. The Pact of the Future is a document expected to be signed during the Summit of the Future, happening on September 22 to 23 in New York. This document aspires to forge new international consensus, international agreements on how we can deliver the SDGs by 2030. So it centers on partnerships and collaboration because sure, we might have biodiversity conservation initiatives in our respective institutions or in our countries, but ultimately it's a global agenda. It's a global problem that we have to address, and thus collaboration and synergy are important. And enough of that. I'm sure you're very excited for our speakers. So let's proceed with our opening plenary. Our opening plenary speaker is Professor Jatna Supriyatna. He is the chairman of Institute Sustainable for Earth and Resources at the University of Indonesia. He is also now Professor of Conservation Biology in the Faculty of Mathematics and Sciences at University of Indonesia. He serves as the country chair for SDSN Indonesia. He is a board of trustee member of United in Diversity Foundation, Conservasi Indonesia, and the Indonesian Climate Change Trust Fund of the Ministry of National Development Planning of the Republic of Indonesia. To talk about global biodiversity challenges and conservation efforts, let us welcome with a warm round of virtual applause, Professor Jatna. Professor Jatna, the floor is yours.
Very good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'd like to thanks to the SDSN Philippines in Southeast Asia and Hong Kong, but also to everybody who more than 100 listening to my talk. So my title will be, what do we need to conserve biodiversity? So I'd like to get from the Indonesian perspective. I believe that there is so much so I can save the diversity. The next slide. So next slide. So I like to start this focus on Indonesia. I know that so many things happen, in the global issue, and in October we're going to have the CBD, and November going to be climate change, and all globally mostly are discussing about environment, including biodiversities. So Indonesia, Philippines, and all this, called the insular Asia, is very important in many things because of the geophysical, right? Indonesia, Philippines has more volcanoes and so on and so on. So anything to see the biodiversity and development has to be related to what the geophysical is. We have earthquake, and almost every day in Indonesia you can see the one here is 5 to above the scale, Richter scales. And we also have so many sea level rise, and because of the tsunami and others. But the most important also that the area also the center for the upwelling and monsoon and so on. So I think the discussion, the follow discussion will be biodiversity in terrestrial or submarine. So this is like a natural gift from whatever that to us, and that's why the biodiversity is a difference compared to the continental one. The next slide, we can see here the definition, what is the definition of biological diversity? Of course, there is so many definition, but basically biodiversity, it's a genetic, a species, and the ecosystems. So biodiversity, basically, it's really, if the species level, we have approximately 5 to 30 million species. Means that there's so many things that recover, unidentify, and many things it's only maybe 10% or 20% that is recognized. And for example, in Indonesia, we have 3,000 has been named and digitized. They're still very small, compared to really what we have. The next slide, we can see the biodiversity in Indonesia. We have Indonesia only 1.3% of the earthland surface, but it's really in one of the biggest biodiversity ever. So if you look at on the right side, what the endemic biodiversity, you see that Brazil, Indonesia, South Africa, Colombia, and many other, including the Philippines and also Asia, of course, China. So what the number, you can see that from the books that Russ Mittermeyer's 1997, where I also part of the co-author, is really discussing about the numbers of biodiversity. 10% of the world flowering plant also are in Indonesia. 12% of the bird mammals are also in Indonesia. And the most amazing is also 20% of the world fish species are also in Indonesia. Bird, 17%, reptile and amphibian or herpetology, herpet animals is also 16%. If you look at what the marine, you can see there's a map. There's Indonesia, Philippines is what you call it the coral triangle, the hottest of the hotspot, where 600 of the coral, reef coral are in this area, where it's Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and Singapore, but also the fishes. So if you consider those, we are in the center of biodiversity in the world. I mean, of course, Brazil is continental. It's a difference. China is also continental. It's only Indonesia and Philippines are the islands-based biodiversity. What does really means? Mean is that really biodiversity are very restricted. It's not like compared to, say, in American continental, you can see the panther from almost to Canada to Argentines, 1,000 kilometers. In Indonesia, for example, the tigers only in Sumatra. It's only few left, Similarly, in many other places in island in Indonesia. The next slide. So what is the biodiversity value? Biodiversity is very important for our life. Biodiversity is resources because they provide us with food, shelter, wood, fiber, energy, raw material, industrial chemicals, and medicines, and to make sure that the world economy are sustained. The other function, of course, value is pollination. Without biodiversity, I don't think that we can survive. Most of those are plant producing carbo, plant producing proteins, also depend on our pollinators, which is butterfly, bat, bird, and many others. We also really on air and water purification. Without biodiversity, forest biodiversity especially, I don't think that we can have really good clean water, because they are really retain the water in the soil and the minerals and so on and so on. We also, of course, depend on the biodiversity on the climate modification and balance. For example, without trees, I think as you can see from desert and the Africa and many others, that the weather is really different compared to the what we have with the plant and trees. Also because the biodiversity such as forest and wetland are also maintaining the drought and also the flood control during the dry and also during the rainy seasons. Nutrient cycling, of course, they are really they're making this. If you see under the soil, how that within many others species interact and they are making theirs. Last one is about the landscape. Of course, we are very dependent on the landscape areas for our life. Next slide. So biodiversity is a green gold. Yeah, it's really without considering biodiversity as a green gold, I think biodiversity will be in the crisis. As you may know, that biodiversity also part of the antibacterial, anti-fungi, anti-malaria, herbicide, anti-tumor, and name it in so many. So as you can see, even now, there are a lot of companies and a lot of countries are using change from chemical medicine into herbal medicine. There's so many, and even for example, all the sources of the medicine is also coming from biodiversities. So I think we still only 7,000 plant species for food, but out of the possible 70,000 plant and many others. So the next slide we can see. Next slide. Biodiversity and ecosystem services. So without biodiversity, we're going to have so many things, as I mentioned before. And this is just how that really not only providing services, but also providing the detoxification and decomposition of the waste or our waste. Plus also how that biodiversity also protect us from many harmfuls, for example, ultraviolets, and also making this our safe from floods and drought and others. Next slide. In terms of foods, I think we are so dependent. I think everything that we eat it's coming from the wild species. Rice, paddies, also coming from China, and yam, and many other coming from South America, tomatoes, potatoes, and many others. So plus also many fishes that really right now, for example, the tilapia is coming from Africa. So our biodiversity, especially domesticated, is already transferred to many other islands from Africa, from South America, from Asia, interchangeable. I think this is really what we need, is really to know what the origins. And then that has to be how we conserve the origin. For example, as we know, in 1960, we almost lost of all the species of carbo because of the genetic problematic with that. We have been trying really hard to find new thing, but at the end up, we are fighting with the pests, fighting with the fungi, fighting with the virals, fighting with many others in terms of these agriculture things. Next slide. The other aspect of biodiversity is also the natural beauty, ecotourism, such as Komodo, for example, now becoming so many people like it. So Komodo is in the Nusa Tenggara. Now is about 400,000 people per year. They just visiting Komodo. So you can imagine that what is the impact, for that. So many people like to see it. Orangutan like to see tarsier in Philippines and many others. But also, of course, the beauty of the divings, for example, how that underwater is so much very important, making it's healthy for us to see the healthy ecosystems. The next slide. So what's happened? We just recognize biodiversity use and prospecting in Indonesia. So for example, here is the statistics of how many of those species has been used by villagers, by the city people, but also by any others, from the vegetable, Of course, we are going to be hegemonized, For example, it's only few right now in the supermarket. In fact, we have approximately 450 species of the vegetable with the vitamins and minerals, and specific species of the herbs and spices, and many others, that is really has been recognized. But how do we conserve this? Do we need to have a local community who can conserve? Or do we need some institution like Asian Biodiversity Center in Manila, Philippines? Or maybe in Indonesia, we have so many centers. How do we conserve this? Whether the private sector also may be one of the important player in the future. Yeah. Next slide. So if you look at the data IUCN 2012, it's a little bit 10 years on. But you can see the biodiversity for pharmaceutical companies is about $643 billion. So biotechnology is about $70 billion and many others, personal care, botanical food, plants, seeds. We on the economy of biodiversity. Professor Gupta from UK has been develop a team to understand the economic of biodiversity, global biodiversity. Of course, we have to dig on to what the community also, because, for example, Indonesia has about 1,000 something tribes. Each tribe also has a different use of that biodiversities. Next slide.
Professor Jatna, excuse me, the points are good, though maybe we can wrap up this part for in 2 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I didn't know that has to be 10 minutes. All right. So deforestation is the problem. That's making the empty forest syndrome, that was really making almost of these. For example, 58% of bird is disappearing and possibly 83% mammal of disappearing. Without a good strategy, I think we're gonna have, that's really the problems. The next slide, I think a few more slide. Source of the wildlife trade, that's also the problematic because people take the wildlife into their kitchen. And that's really making what we have, like COVID-19 and many other disease, Mpox, for example, and also many others is also part of the biodiversity. Next slide. That's why they're making deforestation and biodiversity, what you call it, dilution effect, because we are making the biodiversity becoming less and less available in the jungle. That's really making that many virus is transmitting into our communities and also our domestic animals. Next slide. And also the bleaching coral, also this the impacted a million people that's gonna be hungry because there are no more food and no more fish. Next slide. And I think this is the last one. I think the result of the storing fish and the dialing, it become many fish was taken from the ocean without proper sustainability. They making the possible of overfishing. And that's going to be very important in the future without considering how do we manage our resources. I think that's going to be very difficult in the future. So conservation basically is our strategy, not only for future our generation, but also for our current situation where the people are hungry and biodiversity disappear. So the next slide is, I think that's really the last slide that I think need to present. Thank you very much, the moderator. I hope that it's really good to make this good discussion after this. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jatna, for your insightful talk. And truly, that set the tone for this morning's discussion. So, Professor Jatna highlighted the global biodiversity is so rich and provides a lot of ecosystem services, which to an extent is being abused, and hence the need to conserve our biodiversity. In fact, just to share to everyone, as part of the resources being generated by SDSN Network, that in the 2024 report, it was mentioned that countries are stagnating in attaining SDG 14, life below water, and SDG 15, life on land. There are major challenges in attaining these goals in these targets, and we will hear more about the conservation efforts and initiatives from our panelists. But before we hear from our panelists, once again, let us give a warm round of applause to Professor Jatna. Professor Jatna, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Now, we shall proceed with the presentation of our panelists. As mentioned, we shall have 3 speakers who will be delivering their talk. After the 3 talks, we shall have a panel discussion and open forum, and we hope to hear from our audience later. As our speakers are talking, you may type your questions in the chat, and we will make sure to get to those during the open forum. Alternatively, you may raise your virtual hand during the open forum. As mentioned, our panelists will be discussing terrestrial, aquatic, and urban biodiversity, and we will start with our first speaker, who will focus on terrestrial biodiversity. Ms. Carmilla is the Chief Sustainability Officer at Royal Lestari Utama, or RUL. She has been leading the biodiversity conservation for 10 years, where they integrate the social dimension into their collective efforts. In the past few years, they put more investment into their Community Partnership Program, or the CPP, to realize their objectives to improve the livelihood of smallholder farmers. Friends and colleagues, let us welcome Ms. Carmilla. Ms. Carmilla, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Pleased to be here at SDSN seminar. Also honored to be present here with Professor Yatna, as well as the other panelists, Professor Chui, Ms. Abigail, and of course yourself, Emmanuel, and more importantly, our colleagues and friends attending, joining us today. So please allow me to share my screen.
Sharing screen is enabled.
Yeah. Is it showing already?
Yes, though
Yes.
there are, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I'll start with the focus on the terrestrial biodiversity, of course, a little bit or more or less on the Indonesian perimeter, as this is what I understand better. So I'll touch on a few key topics on the terms of the status and challenges, initiative, as well as the trends, and last one on the willingness to move forward. So just a bit of context, which we heard just earlier through Professor Gatna presentation. So Indonesia is currently managing 55 national parks. Of course, this is an increase in terms of the number from 1918, where we started with 5 national parks. Now, the number of the areas is remarkably huge. 25 million hectares on land, but also on water. This is about the same size of the whole Great Britain. So we can imagine, yeah, how big the area is. To add on this area, and also remarkably, until today, new species are still being discovered. In the last 3 years, at least 90 species discovered through the work of our National Research and Innovation Agency, as well as our Ministry of Forestry and Environment. In 2023 only, there are about 40 species being discovered. So this is again to confirm what Prof. Yatna has shared with us before, that we are living in the mega biodiversity areas. Yeah. So numbers, personally, it's not really justifying what we have, right? Because as we increase our knowledge using more technology, we are about to discover more and more species. Let's take a look on the particular bird species. So, of course, IUCN red list is one of the indicators and reference we continue using to understand how is our wildlife doing, right? So it has all of the categories from the non-threatened, which is least concern, to the very serious situation, critically endangered, before, of course, extinct. So this graph showing the change between the year of 2023 and this year's YTD, of course. And these reports from the Burung Indonesia mentioned that there are 8 species that have moved up the ladder from the non-threatened category into the more threatened category. But there are more species that actually move down from threatened categories to even non-threatened categories or least concern. But does this mean that our birds situations is improving? Let's take a look at the 2 highest category in the graph. So we have endangered, it's on the purple color, as well as the critically endangered, right? So in terms of the endangered, moss is still around the same, yeah, still in the same category. Critically endangered, no change, meaning that the biodiversity of the species that we considered highly threatened is still highly threatened. So we cannot say that that we are actually improving based on the just 40 species being moved down to least concern. Insight to this is how do we get into knowing that we can move some species from threatened to least threatened. The interesting part is that due to the increase of knowledge, due to our scientists' ability to identify in more detail, not just in terms of the morphology, but also in terms of the all the way until DNA, they can identify whether a species that was categorized as one species is actually 2 separate species, right? So also it was enabled by the technology, the electron microscopes and so on, helps to identify this, very fine detail of the species. The second insights from these changes is that there are actually contribution. So there are more information coming out from the public, coming out from citizen like us, right? Informing that this is, the species is still in this area, this particular species, we still found it in this part of the forest. So more information, of course, contribute to this information and the changes in the status. So again, not necessarily that it's improved, but because the area of knowledge is improving and the contribution from public is improving, then we have better information, better knowledge of understanding the situation of our species.
Carmela, excuse me, we can see the figure in the previous slide, but there seems to be a block which covers the right part of the screen. Yeah.
This is like this?
It's covering some of the text. Okay, yeah, it's better. Yeah.
Oops. Okay. Next on the challenges. This is something that Professor Nirna already touched earlier, right? So we'll not repeat again. But the highlight here is that in Indonesia, despite that, we managed to reduce the forest loss in the last 7 years. It's been quite substantial in terms of the forest loss rates. But again, the key message is that it is still happening, right? We're still losing the forest, which is critical if we want to protect the biodiversity, especially the terrestrial biodiversity, because this is where most of the main habitats are. So we know that habitat loss been the main driver for the biodiversity loss since as early as 1980s. The second threat to this biodiversity is wildlife threat, also been shown by Professor Yatna. So again, this is not a small issue. In fact, this is in addition to forest loss that is creating or impacting to our biodiversity. It's a staggering impact if we measure that. So it's up to 80% of the population reduction, probably more. This is based on the data that the science have. In Indonesia alone, it is important to understand that the majority of this wildlife trade coming from illegal activities from the forests that we have throughout Indonesia, but also, of course, if we're talking about outside of Indonesia, like Philippines, China, and so on. What's important about the term of silent forest phenomenon is that when we don't have these species, right, we may have still a forest standing. In Java, I think in terms of the protection of the national park, it's way better. We don't hear that much about forests being converted or illegal logging happening in our national park in Java. But what is threatening or what is scary is that it's basically no sound at all. No sound means no wildlife in the forest. And when we don't have wildlife in the forest, then our forest health is at huge risk. Now, when we don't have these animals, of course, the forest will not be able to provide us with goods and services, and all of the details that have shown by Professor Yatna. But in particular, in specific for Indonesian people, there are about 25% of the Indonesian population. Their livelihood, their lives directly depends on this forest. So it's about 25% of the Indonesian population. It's about 60 million people. So, it's a huge number. Okay, so we understand a bit the status. We know the challenges is, forest loss and wildlife trade. Now, what are the initiatives and trends that we are currently seeing and we hope to see, of course, in the future? Earlier, Professor Yatna mentioned that the private sector could be an important or must be an important actor in the future. I say private sector needs to be an important actor today. So we don't need for the future, we have to act today. Why? Because basically, in terms of the area that the forestry concession manage, it's substantial. So there are about 40 million of within the production forest concession are still in the forest cover, showing that if it's well protected, if it's well managed, then it will provide a vital, significant contribution for the biodiversity. And to highlight that each and every forestry concession holders, they do have roles in terms of the biodiversity protection, right? So it's not that we are just to produce the commodity, but we are there to protect the environment, protect the biodiversity while producing this commodity for our needs. I will touch a bit on the RLU, my work. So we are operating in both Jambi and East Kalimantan provinces, area covering 88,000 hectares. So it's considered it's a big concession, right? Out of this 80,000 hectares, we'll only plant 25,000 hectares as our main crops, which is natural rubber. The rest, at the moment, we have about 20% allocated and managed fully managed as conservation area. This is the forest that we identified and set aside and patrol each and every day, 24, not 24 hours, but 365 days. So every day throughout the year that we patrol the forest to ensure that there is no threats to this forest, and when there's a threat to these areas, we stop them as early as possible. As I mentioned, that concessions for the forestry concessions, they are in huge areas, and also to mention that our biodiversity, our wildlife species are not restricted in the national park or natural reserve, but they are also in these areas. So that is why if we have the national parks, natural reserves are fully functional, and then we have the conservation areas within the production forests are fully functional as well. Imagine how many areas of forest that we can ensure its preservation, and the services are sustainable to provide not only for the biodiversity, again for our people. Now, moving on to the other initiatives that I think globally, we've seen the rise of more participation, more contribution from the public or from the citizens, right? So I'll just take one example from the movement that we have here in Indonesia in particular. First, it's just focused on birds. So Bird Packer Indonesia, this is started first as just a group of bird watcher, bird enthusiasts. Of course, there's also bird scientists involved in there. But what's remarkable is that they are putting their commitment, they're putting their concern for birds into action, right? So they have this Burungnesia. This is a platform where basically everybody can put information, whoever see any birds in any particular place at any given time, they can just, put this information, and it's automatically, get into this app where it has the map where this shows all the sightings, all the detection of these birds, right? And so it's, it is basically a giant pool of information. And not stopping at that, just one Burungnesia app. In 2020, when we were hit by COVID, they published an atlas of Indonesian birds. This is one very significant contribution to birds conservation in Indonesia, because this is the first, and it comes from the public, it comes from the people with their resources, right? It's not coming from the government, it's not coming from the NGO, it's coming from people who show their concern and put it into an action, put it into a real a product. After that, we have the field guides. Again, this is the first field guide. We used to have, and still use until today, a field guide written by non-Indonesian. So having this, of course, an updated version of the field guide will be, a very, very great contribution. I'm sure this is already being used as a reference for our park rangers and park managers in Indonesia. So not stopping on just birds, today what they launched is Amati Sangkar in Indonesian. Is called Reporting on Wildlife in Cages. So birds, but also mammals, reptiles, and amphibians, basically any animals that people can observe, either in the cages or in somebody's house, to understand how many that are actually how many wildlife that are actually in people's houses, in people's cages. Which is, again, this is we can imagine the data that will be generated from this activity. It's a very simple activity, right? Anybody can do it, but we can imagine how big the contribution will be, as we've seen on the birds efforts before. As we've heard this, this phrase, I think many times. It's also, in many books, in movies as well, that knowledge is power, right? So our public is already contributing, already playing a vital role in terms of, providing the basic for our conservation, which is the information, the knowledge.
Ms. Carmela, perhaps a minute to wrap up. Thank
Yep.
you.
This is my last slides. So of course, the end question: what should we do? What do we need to do? Right? What do we need to do to ensure that we preserve the biodiversity, that we take necessary actions to protect this biodiversity? Because I think very simple, because our lives depends on the biodiversity. So I put here just 3 boxes aligning with or corresponding with each of the groups. So of course, this is something that I think we don't need to. As we talk about challenges, there are so many challenges, right? But let's focus on what we can do. But more importantly, our willingness to do, right? Because we can have so many plans. We can have commitment, strengthening the commitment everywhere. But when it's not translated into a decision to make action, into a willingness to do something, then it stays on the document, it stays on the paper. So critically, the role that the government needs to put more priority is to stop the illegal wildlife trade, start from the strengthening the regulation, of course, put into force the law itself, and having the personal with integrity is essential to make this happen. For us, I'm speaking about RLU and also for other private sectors. We heard about the sustainability, early 2000 in the millennium, that sustainability is the new paradigm. It's now becoming everyday conversation. But actually, in terms of implementation, it's new. It's a new standard. It's a new normal of doing business. So it's no longer nice to have, but it's actually an investment as important as producing this commodity. Very simple in terms of the public as a whole, to continue what's been the initiative so far, to continue being more critical. Maybe we need to start do get more support, get more involvement from the our influencers, leveraging the social media, because this is really, as we've seen in the wildlife trade, this is the platform, this is the today's platform that are being utilized to to bring impacts, to share the voice. So leveraging what we have in giving the information about biodiversity, why they are best in the wild, why they are best in the forest, not in our house. So I think as Pope Franciscus say during his visit to Indonesia today, it's a privilege to have him here. He mentioned that it is the willingness that matters, because this is our greatest strength to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carmela Paracasi, for your talk. It is great to hear the initiatives of RLU, and you made a good point in the necessity of the government and the private sector to collaborate in biodiversity initiatives. Thank you also for, I think one of the messages that we will take home with us is the importance of citizen science, which highlights how everyone can contribute to the solution and how we should leverage the modern day context, the context of the social media right now. So thank you once again. A warm round of applause, please, for Ms. Carmela. A reminder for our audience, you may type in the questions via Zoom chat, and we will get to those shortly during the panel discussion. From SDG 15, Life on Land, let us move to SDG 14, Life Below Water. Our second panel speaker will talk about marine biodiversity. Professor Apple Chu is a research assistant professor at the School of Life Sciences at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Prof. Apple, also known as Coral Mom, is a National Geographic explorer and a recipient of the GGF Woman Eco Game Changer Awards, Eco Star of China 2019. She obtained her PhD in environmental science and biology programs from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Her learner-centered teaching approach has earned her the University Education Award 2020, finalist of the 2020 University Grants Committee Teaching Awards Early Career, Faculty Exemplary Teaching Awards 2018 and 2018 and 2023, among other awards. As a committed science communicator and devoted conservationist, Professor Apple has been actively engaged in public outreach and education activities on marine and coral conservation in Hong Kong. In 2019, she officially founded the now well-established education outreach program Coral Academy that aims to raise public and students' awareness and inspire action in coral conservation. Friends and colleagues, to deliver a talk entitled Reviving Hong Kong's Coral Communities, Insights, Challenges, and Next Steps, I present to you Professor Apple. Professor Apple, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm going to share my slide first. Right. Okay. Okay. I hope you all see my slides, right?
Yes.
Great, perfect. Then I'll go ahead. Hi everyone. My name is Apple. A quick jump from Indonesia to Hong Kong. So here in Hong Kong, people sometimes call me Coral Mom because every year me and my team, we breed corals for research and restoration purposes. So today I'm very honored to be here to share with you something that I'm really passionate about, that is corals, especially our works on coral restoration. Where are we now? What we have learned so far and what next? So I think to a lot of people, when you think of Hong Kong, you will probably think of this, right? A densely populated city, tall packed buildings, just like a concrete jungle. But actually, apart from the concrete jungle, this is Hong Kong as well. So many people may not be aware that we also have very nice natural environment around in Hong Kong. And if you ever have a chance to dive down in the water, you even have chance to find places with very nice coral coverage, just like this one. Now, this is underwater Hong Kong. Now, here in Hong Kong, we have places with very nice coral coverage and diversity like this video. However, at the same time, we also have places where they're used to support very high coral coverage, but not anymore. So today, in this talk, I'd like to talk to you about a case study that happened in northeastern Hong Kong, the To Lo Harbour and Channel, which is our coral restoration demonstration sites in Hong Kong. This map shows you the To Lo Harbour and Channel, and our lab is actually located right here. So back in 1980, Bush Reef, North Reef, the two islands along this To Lo Channel, there has been record of very high coral coverage to up to 70–80%, if you can see from this map. Now that's a lot, right? Then what happened was due to anthropogenic disturbances. We're talking about untreated sewage, livestock, industrial waste, all corals just destroyed. You know, the whole habitat was just destroyed in a few years' time. And this was described as the first marine ecological disaster in Hong Kong. So in 1987, our Hong Kong government took immediate action and implement the To Lo Harbour Action Plan. So after more than a decade, more than 10 years of cumulative efforts, it actually worked. The water quality of the area significantly improved. Now, the next question is, with the cost of degradation being properly managed, will the corals return naturally? So unfortunately, the reality is that even after the improved water quality, our corals just never returned, not even 20 years later. And this was, absolutely devastating, not just for the loss of coral itself, but also for the ecosystem goods, services that they provide, like we're talking about the biodiversity and all those breeding nursery grounds that they provide for many marine life. So now with the cost of degradation being properly managed, we decided that perhaps it's really time for us to do something about it. That is, can we find ways to bring this coral ecosystem back? Now, so that's where we came in. So this is our marine lab in CUHK, the Chinese University of Hong Kong. So one of our research focus is on coral restoration. And, when we talk about coral restoration, one of the first questions that we like to address here in Hong Kong is how can we create a sustainable source of healthy coral colonies for us to outplant in the very first place? So here in our lab, we actually focus on effective coral breeding and propagation techniques, including the use of coral larvae, coral babies. And here I like to especially thank our grantors, including the Pew Fellowship in Marine Conservation, Environmental Conservation Fund, government departments like AFCD, CDD for their support in this area. So there are actually basically two ways when it comes to propagating corals. Asexually propagated corals, we call it the fragments, and sexually propagated corals, we call them the baby corals. So what does it means? Use plant as an example. Asexual fragment is just like stem cutting. So you cut a portion of the stem of a plant, and then you grow them. Eventually, it will become a new plant. So these coral fragments that we use, they're actually broken portions of a coral colony in the field. So what we do is we collect them, and then we further fragment them into smaller pieces, provide them with a base to attach on, allow them to recover a little bit, and then they're good for outplanting, and then we can use them as a source. And on top of that, we have sexually propagated corals, that is the baby corals. It involves the collection of gametes from corals during spawning. We culture them into larvae, settle them as baby corals on substrate that we provide. So these little ones, we usually have to culture them in our lab-based nursery for like 1 to 2 years until it reaches size to like 2-3 centimeters in diameter, and then we will outplant them, use them as a coral source for outplanting. So in 2029, we have our first ever outplanting of these 2-year-old juvenile corals together with coral fragments in total channel for restoration purposes. So this was a pilot study because we didn't know whether or not we plant the corals, whether or not they will survive, because it was the highly degraded sites. So, today I'm very proud to share with you 3 important milestones that my team has achieved so far in that total channel that, really motivate us to do more in the future. First is high survival. We have different species outplanted on the natural substrate. And for all the corals outplanted, we achieve almost 90% of survival, which is a very, very exciting number. It actually means that the site, the heavily degraded sites, the overall environment is ready for more coral restoration, upscaling of our restoration efforts. And in addition to that, we, for the very first time, see butterfly fish coming back. You see this little cute little yellow fish with a dark spot on the side. So these butterfly fish is usually used as indicators for assessing coral reef health. We never see butterfly fish before in our restoration sites, but we now, after 4 years of outplanting our efforts, we now have 4 to 5 of them in the sites. Not too much, but it's really a very good sign of, bringing biodiversity back. Thirdly, not only that our corals survive after 3 years, remember the babies, when they turn 5 years old, they become parents. So they spawn in the field for the very first time. So when these corals spawn, we also collect the gametes, bring to the lab, and we fertilize them and culture them. So right now, this little one, this cute little baby that you can see on the screen, this is already our 2nd generation babies. So now basically what we need to do is to scale up our restoration efforts. Because, our ultimate goal is to restore the whole ecosystem goods and services. However, we have also identified a bottleneck, which is this very slow growth of the corals that might potentially hinder the restoration success. For example, these two pictures actually shows you the top view of one of our restoration plot, 2 meters times 2 meters plot, 1 year and 2 years after our planting. So the most obvious corals that you can see here is actually the branch form corals, the Acropora corals, which is considered the fastest growing corals. Here actually, we also have 4 other massive form coral genera that we outlined but grow way slower. So Acropora, as you can see from this graph, the branch form coral genus, they almost have 150 fold average growth over the 3.5 years of outplant. But in the meantime, you can see for the rest of the massive form coral genera, they showed very similarly slow growth, just 2-3 folds increase in area on average. Now the question is, with such slow growth, how can we consider our current restoration effort a success? Especially that in our coral communities here in Hong Kong, it is mostly dominated by the massive form corals. It might just take them several decades to rebuild the communities, the structural complexity of the habitat. So to overcome this bottleneck of slow growth, we are right now using micro-colony fusion approach and micro-fragmentation approach, trying to bring larger massive form corals back. So this approach has been adopted in many other countries. It actually involves cutting corals into microfragments, very small pieces to boost their growth, a grow out period where we optimize the land-based coral nursery, and afterwards after we grow them into a larger size, we put them together again and we attach them on an artificial module to allow them to grow out and then fuse to a larger colonies. So this is so-called the reskinning process. And so this is the first trial, 15 centimeters in diameter. In this size, without microfragmentation, this technique, this process, it may take them 7 years in Hong Kong to reach this size. However, for example, for Porites and Platygyra, it only takes them like less than half a year to reach the size that in the field they might need 7 years to achieve. So these are actually very promising techniques. Now, one of the approaches that are being proposed, which has the potential for scaling up restoration efforts to a larger area, is this larval enhancement approach. So the idea of larval enhancement is to directly seed competent coral larvae in degraded coral areas in order to boost the natural recruitment in the field. So we also tried this work, but the results simply indicate that this method just won't work in our marine environment, in our setting. We've done it twice, and in both attempts, not only the number of settlement is low, almost all of the coral babies, they die in 4 months after they settle, which is very unfortunate, but I would say the result is not totally unexpected in our marine system, because in Hong Kong, we already have a record of very poor coral recruitment success that has been documented. I've listed some of the major challenges here, which include, for example, high sedimentation, intense competition of space with other benthos, fouling organisms, like, for example, in here you can see barnacles, sometimes oysters, browsowans, algae. There's such a strong space competitor that it will just overgrow the coral babies. And of course, slow growth is also another fundamental problem that contributes to low post-settlement survival as well. So you can see that life is really hard for these little babies to survive in Hong Kong in general. And it also explains the recruitment failure in Hong Kong, and that's why the larval enhancement just won't work in our case. So to conclude a little bit on what we have learned so far and what next is, of course, the first thing is that coral communities could so easily be destroyed in our case, and yet natural recovery could be so difficult and unlikely because of the slow growth in nature of corals and the very low coral recruitment background in Hong Kong. And because of that, active coral restoration is needed to help restore degraded area. And in order to achieve that, we actually have to scale up our asexual sexual propagation to maximize our land-based coral nursery method so we can have the source of corals for outplanting. And what we know is that the land-based nursery is necessary because, the coral babies won't make it in the field when they're still small. So we have to actually culture them in our land-based nursery. So what we need to do is to optimize our nursery to shorten the coral residency time. And we should also consider more coral species for propagation to bring in diversity. And it's with a very well-established coral sexual propagation pipeline here in our lab, we also have, opportunities to find ways to enhance the resilience of coral stock, so that our outplant corals not only survive now, but they will probably be able, or we hope them to be able to survive future changing environments. Well, because when we talk about global warming, climate change, we know that the environment is going to change in the future. It will be more harsh for them to survive. And for massive form coral, we actually advised the use of microfragmentation techniques as an approach to boost coral growth, especially it's kind of like a must-do work in Hong Kong because of the slow growth of corals in nature, especially for massive form corals. Build partnerships. So here we have very good platform for collaboration. And speaking of that, Coral Academy is an outreach initiative I started back in 2018 with an aim to raise community awareness and inspire action in coral conservation. So over the years, we are very grateful to receive tremendous support from, for example, government, NGOs, education groups in Hong Kong to have launched some very cool program to try to engage everyone in our journey of coral conservation and restoration. So for example, we have citizen science program, workshops, exhibitions, and in just 5 years time, we have actually reached over 60 local schools, 30,000 students and teachers, and over 200,000 public through our education outreach. And we are also very honored that one of our flagship program that is called Develop and supported by Hong Kong government as well, the School Coral Nursery Program has been recognized by the Falling War Science Breakthrough of the year 2024 as one of the top 20 projects in science engagement. So this program is the first and only one in Hong Kong that directly involves local students in coral restoration. So the school are transforming the coral nurseries where students actually engage in coral culturing, maintenance, monitoring of growth and health, etc. And these corals, most importantly, after like a year of effort of culturing, these corals are later outplanted by our team, the researchers, to help with restoration efforts in Hong Kong. And just last year, we have signed a memorandum of understanding with WWF to partner with WWF on a coral restoration community education program in Hong Kong. So reviving our coral initiatives, this is a very cool initiative. You can Google us online as well. So if you want to learn more about our education outreach, please feel free to check our Facebook website to learn more about our other initiatives as well. So these are all some very exciting news. So I think that's all about it. Thank you for listening, and later on, questions and comments are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Apple, for your talk. It is clear that you have done extraordinary work on corals, especially on how coral population resilience can be enhanced and how degraded coral habitats can be restored at ecologically meaningful scales using reskilling. Actually, I don't know with our participants, but hearing success stories in bringing biodiversity back gives hope. So it's very, very exciting to hear success stories like this. Okay. So again, an invitation for everyone to send in your questions by typing them in the chat. We'll get back to you. We'll get to those questions shortly. Again, thank you, Professor Apple. From terrestrial to marine biodiversity, let us move to urban biodiversity to be discussed by our third speaker. Ms. Abigail Marie T. Favis is an assistant professor at the Department of Environmental Science at the Ateneo de Manila University in the Philippines. And she is also the co-founder of the Ateneo Wild, a social media citizen science campaign on urban biodiversity. She received her bachelor's degree in environmental science from Ateneo and took her master's of science in environmental sanitation at the State University of Ghent in Belgium. She teaches environmental science and science, technology, and society in the university and served as a program manager for campus sustainability in the same university for more than a decade. Her research interests include sustainable consumption, food waste, urban biodiversity, and green spaces. Without much further ado, let us welcome Miss Abby.
Thank
Abby, the
you
floor is
very
yours.
much. Yeah, thank you very much, Doc Eman, for that introduction. And hello to everyone. I'm so happy to be here today. And thank you for the opportunity to share the work that we do at the Ateneo Wild. And on behalf of my, let me just fix my screen. On behalf of my co-founder, Trinket Constantino, who cannot be with us today, I'm so pleased to share with you some of the work that we are doing at our campus. So our work revolves around urban biodiversity because our campus is in an urban area. And when we think of urban biodiversity, when we think of cities, maybe one of the things that will come to mind is concrete or glass or steel, which are ingredients of urban infrastructure like buildings and roads. But cities can also be places where you can find nature and biodiversity. So think of parks, urban forests, ponds and creeks, gardens, school campuses, and even cemeteries are spaces that can harbor biodiversity in the city. And on the slide, you'll see a very nice poster from the ICLEI Cities Biodiversity Center that summarizes the different contributions of these nature spaces to urban life. So just to echo Professor Jatna's talk on biodiversity value and services, we can get a lot of services from urban biodiversity as well, ranging from microclimate regulation to air pollution filtration, nutrient cycling, and more than that, also services that do a lot of things for our health and well-being, providing us with spaces for recreation and community building, and also nature education. In Metro Manila, unfortunately, and on your screen, you will see a map of green spaces in Metro Manila. So these are the green shaded areas in Metro Manila, and I guess like in any other urban center all over the world, green spaces are rapidly dwindling because of course, rapid urbanization. Many of us live in cities, and by 2050, more than half of the world's population will live in cities already. And this is why it's very important to recognize how significant even nature spaces in urban areas can be. So like anywhere else, urban nature spaces are under threat, and many of these negative impacts to urban biodiversity are those that are inherent to city infrastructure and the lifestyle of human dwellers. And this includes poorly planned urbanization, light and noise pollution, of course, improper waste disposal, even the presence of invasive species, human-wildlife conflicts, and of course, wildlife and infrastructure conflicts as well. So this is why we also want to devote a lot of effort into recognizing why it's important to maintain and also appreciate the nature spaces that we have in urban areas. So for our context at the Ateneo Wild, which is one of our pet projects here in the university, our campus is in one of the last remaining green corridors of Quezon City. And if you look closely at this map, we're about here. And this is Katipunan Avenue. Our university, Ateneo, is over here. We are close to Miriam College and the University of the Philippines in Diliman, as well as several city parks like the Quezon Memorial Circle, and of course, other ecosystems like the Marikina River as well. So our campus here at the Ateneo de Manila University is around 86 hectares big, and only 40% of it is built up space, which means on campus we still have a lot of unbuilt areas and green spaces that harbor urban biodiversity. So for the Ateneo Wild, we love sharing nature experiences with others, especially on campus. And our goals are threefold. First, we want to build a campus biodiversity inventory that hopefully can influence university policy. and how we manage our green spaces and campus biodiversity. We also want to show the presence and importance of urban biodiversity, because sometimes when we ask our community members, what plants and animals do you think exist in the city? They'll say stray cats, or they'll say pests like cockroaches, but there are more than that to life in cities. And we want to, of course, encourage contact with nature and nature experiences, because we know that this is one of the strongest predictors for environmentally responsible behaviors in the future when they are adults. So our approach to this, and I'm so thrilled that our previous speakers have also mentioned citizen science, because our approach to our work is, of course, involving the community in collecting this scientific data. So we use citizen science as our approach. And we use social media as our main platform for communication. So we're at the Ateneo Wild on Facebook and Instagram. So we use citizen science so we can amplify our data collection across space and time as well. But moreover, it's because citizen science has been shown to have positive and measurable impacts on science literacy, nature education, and contact with nature as well. So for our little project, our advocacy really revolves around recognizing that cities don't have to be, as they say, ecological monstrosities, that you can find nature in the city too, and that urban nature spaces are important in keeping the city livable and beautiful. So everything that makes us healthy and happy in the city is in one way or another related to ecosystem services provided by these urban spaces. And very specifically, if we want to make our campus a haven for local urban wildlife, we need to prioritize, of course, native plant species as the foundation for the ecosystems on campus. And hopefully, the work that we do contributes to achieving several university priorities, particularly those of the Laudato Si goals on responding to the cry of the earth and ecological education, and of course the SDGs 11, 15, and 14, and of course target 12 of the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Protocol as well. So the Ateneo Wild, our project started as just us sharing photos of various campus wildlife just to draw attention. Our first platform was Instagram because we wanted to be photograph based, and we know that most of our young students are on social media as well. But eventually it evolved or morphed into a community activity. So a lot of the photos that you will see, all of the photos that you see on this slide are contributions from the community, photographs from our citizen scientists on campus that we feature on our social media pages. And we use social media to tell stories of campus biodiversity. That's how we try to make a connection between our community members and the nature around them, because most of the time these are spaces and organisms that are taken for granted. So we feature, of course, a photograph, and we prioritize photographs that tell a story. For example, you'll see here on this slide, this is an eastern cattle egret eating a centipede in our baseball field. So we feature the common name, the scientific name, and we also want to connect it to our local culture. So we also feature the local names. Okay, so we feature the local name, the location of where we spotted this on campus. So if they want to see it for themselves, they can come and visit. We also tell stories and trivia about these organisms, connected, of course, to not just the science, but also art and culture and heritage. And we try to get them interested in the things that we, over time, checking student papers. He was going home, and across his path, the snake slithered across it. Trinket and I would not have seen this because we were already home by that time, but our citizen scientists help us to document hard to observe species, even when we're not on campus anymore. We also have contributions that help us document unusual characteristics. So for a very long time, the identity of this caterpillar eluded us, and we for a while thought this can't be real because the colors were really just, we haven't seen these colors before. It turns out to be an instar of the common mime butterfly, and we had lepidopterists, experts in Lepidoptera, help us to identify this species. We also rely on our citizen scientists to help us document evidence of successful reproduction. For example, this is a juvenile Philippine water monitor reported from the high school area. We also get reports of wildlife in need. For example, this is a sparrowhawk that got trapped in a chicken coop in one of the areas on campus because it wanted to eat the chicks, but it couldn't get out anymore. So it was reported to us, and we helped the community members release the sparrowhawk back into the wild. And especially during the quarantine, when the campus was on lockdown, we had campus residents who were here anyway to help us record the presence of organisms as well, like this Philippine serpent eagle. But beyond, of course, our work on social media, we try to make the experience more immersive. So we help them experience the campus through guided nature walks as well. So we try to have this every month. We just had one towards the end of August, and we bring community members around. We try to make it as experiential as possible, so it's not just looking at organisms, but also tasting whatever fruits are in season, or smelling the flowers, or smelling the leaves, and also touching the different textures of nature there. And it's a very nice experience for them because they get to see more of nature in just the campus around them. So this is Trinket, my partner. We provide the community with binoculars. Then we bring them around and we tell stories, and we get them to experience the different nature spaces on campus. So I will stop the video already. Aside from nature walks, we also co-create materials like field guides, learning tools, and some art. So these are just samples of the work that we've already done with different partners. If you use the QR code that you see on the screen, it will bring you to the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability website, where some of these materials are available for free to download. And in particular, I just wanted to also highlight that during the pandemic, we had to pivot and see what activities and materials that we could do, even if people were quarantined inside their homes. And we found there was a very big market, or a very big need for nature education materials, especially for young kids who were stuck at home with their parents. So we created these urban biodiversity flashcards in partnership with the Forest Foundation Philippines, and also the Don Chorus flashcards in partnership with the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability to help them out. We also hold interactive events and community engagement activities. So we partner with different organizations to have film showings, to have workshops, and to have interactive exhibits where we can get more people to be involved and to know more about urban biodiversity and urban nature spaces. So I just wanted to share with you some encouraging outcomes that we've experienced on campus. One of them is, of course, working with the administration to make sure that wildlife welfare is made a part of decision making. For example, in the past, when there would be beehives on campus, the first reaction would be fear, and they would get some people, some exterminators, to remove the beehives. But we've been explaining to them the importance of pollinators and the behavior of pollinators, that they will really not harm you unless you threaten their colony or hive. So unless there's a very real threat to community safety, especially with young children. Now, whenever there's a beehive, we just cordon the area off. We post some awareness signs that there's a beehive here, you can avoid the area, or just don't act aggressively, and let's just let the bees be. And in complementary to that, we've also established, and I think this is a brainchild of one of our former program officers for campus sustainability, Nina, who's also in the audience today. Hi, Nina. So we have pollinator pockets all over the campus, not just to provide habitat for urban pollinators, but also for nature education. So there's signages around these pollinator pockets, encouraging the community to get to know the wildflowers and the different pollinators that live there. Another example of an encouraging outcome in terms of biodiversity conservation and protection is we also have a lot of reptiles on campus, and we have in fact, seven snake species. And the photo that you see here is of the paradise tree snake, a very beautiful snake. But unfortunately, and I think many of us here in the room can relate to this, when you see a snake, commonly the first reaction is fear. So the snake, the paradise tree snake that you see here in this plastic container is already dead because it unfortunately entered a classroom, and the reaction of the people was to kill it out of fear. And they sent us documentation of that. But now we feature our snakes. We tell them about the importance of these reptiles and how snakes are actually more afraid of people than we are of them. Fortunately, we also have no venomous snakes on campus anyway. So now, instead of killing snakes, we get more reports about, and this video that I'm playing for you now is one of our maintenance personnel releasing one of the paradise tree snakes that they caught on campus back into the wild areas of campus as well. So we count that as a win, changing mindset, and of course how we view biodiversity, even if they're not cute and cuddly, and how just recognizing how important they are. So I mentioned earlier, one of the other threats to urban biodiversity is, of course, wildlife and infrastructure conflicts. And one of those is because here in the Philippines, at least, we put up some decals on these windows to break up the reflection, and so helping the birds detect that this is not open space, but a solid material. We're also very happy to work with the administration to build capacity in our staff for handling wildlife. So as I mentioned earlier, a big portion of the campus remains unbuilt, and we do have a lot of wild areas on campus. And sometimes organisms or animals get lost in our classrooms and offices. So it's very important for us to make sure our maintenance personnel, our security personnel, our staff are prepared and equipped to handle such events humanely, to make sure that both them and the wildlife is safe. So we partner with the Biodiversity Management Bureau, and we get wildlife experts to come and train our personnel on how to handle such instances. We're also happy that the administration has also been supportive of allocating space to make an arboretum of threatened Philippine trees, and this is in partnership with the Energy Development Corporation. So we have over 101 specimens of threatened Philippine trees that we're taking care of in our arboretum. And when these trees have developed fruit and seed, we collect them and we share them with reforestation efforts all over the country. But because education is our core business here at the university, we also want to make sure we integrate all of these activities into academic and non-academic programs, especially for younger students. And we're very happy to see that there is a growing interest in integrating urban biodiversity and related activities in the classroom. So these are just some examples of student-led initiatives and walks, and then also activities that we do with younger students here in the university. And some of the last photo that you see here is a mural that some of our community members painted in one of our buildings. So it's very nice to see how the community is responding to the work and to the advocacy for showing that there is a lot of nature even on campus. And so we've already been building our biodiversity inventory. So we maintain an inventory status for several representative taxa. And over the years that we've been operating, we have documented 98 species of birds, 12 species of reptiles, 8 species of amphibians, 63 species of moths and butterflies and 86 species of native trees, all in our very small 86-hectare campus. But of course, challenges still remain. We're very challenged. Also, Trinket and I are both citizen scientists ourselves because our science specialization is not related to zoology or botany or taxonomy and systematics. So identification to the species level remains a big challenge, as well as, of course, reporting mechanisms, how to make this more efficient. One of our biggest challenges, and I think you can view the university as a microcosm of the city also, is how do we balance competing interests? For example, in terms of land use, balancing plans in the campus, for example, building a parking lot in a previously green area. So that still remains to be one of our biggest challenges as well. But we're very glad and happy to have a supportive network of different nature and experts in different types of taxa, the Wild Bird Club of the Philippines, Philippine Native Plants Conservation. We also have already other universities joined in on the Wild brand. So we have the UP Wild, the UST Wild, and the Mindanao State University Wild, as well as grants and supports from corporations and different organizations within and beyond the university. So just to wrap up this talk, I just want to emphasize there is nature in the city, and it's very important that we recognize and appreciate this. And campuses in particular are significant sites for urban biodiversity conservation and nature education as well. And using citizen science empowers non-scientists to significantly contribute to biodiversity conservation. And biggest, and of course, most important is that collaboration is key. So we need to work together and work with others to make sure that we make biodiversity conservation, even in the city, a success. So with that, thank you very much. If you would like to connect with us, our contact details are on the screen. And thank you again for this opportunity to join this event.
Thank you, Ms. Abby, for your talk. Thanks for sharing the initiatives in promoting urban biodiversity and, of course, with the paradigms on changing mindsets in protecting biodiversity in all forms, especially in the context of the city. Now we shall proceed with our panel discussion. But in the interest of time, I will be synthesizing the questions provided in the chat. So if you can just spotlight our speakers. Okay. So the question for our speakers is on cooperation. And so essentially, clearly cooperation for biodiversity conservation is very important. But there are challenges and hopefully success stories also in cooperation. Some of you touched on these already. Perhaps as we draw this discussion to a close, you can share about challenges in ensuring cooperation or multilateral collaboration for biodiversity. And from your experience, perhaps you can share success stories on what works, success stories or models on what works in fostering cooperation across different sectors regarding conservation. Maybe just to link to the questions in the chat, maybe Ms. Carmilla, you can talk about how forest rangers are contributing to your conservation initiatives, or for Prof. Apple, for example, and maybe the studies by climate change scientists on how they impact coral restoration efforts, or maybe for Ms. Abby, how the public or the community, the university community, can help in tracking the movement of wildlife using location coordinates, if that's possible. Anyone who would like to begin?
Hi, perhaps I'll go first. Hi, everyone. Thanks a lot for leaving a lot of insightful questions in the chat box. Perhaps I'll address the question raised by Emmanuel first, and then we'll talk about those questions in the chat box. Well, talking about collaboration, we love collaborations, and I feel like we have amazing panelists here, so I'm really happy to be able to join this section with the rest of the panelists. And actually, collaboration, these terms, I also heard it from the two panels as well. So I think we all appreciate collaboration, and we believe collaboration can lead to much bigger scale movement and appreciation, etc. So for my case, I feel like Hong Kong is so small, so we actually collaborate with people a lot. So we collaborate closely with the government and also local groups, NGOs, education groups as well. Especially we are now putting more focus on citizen science program, because there, for example, in the case of marine field, there are a lot of divers. They are available and very willing to help out with local marine conservation issues. For example, we are actually planning to launch some large-scale citizen science program in terms of coral restoration. So we're not there yet, but we are getting there. So I feel like the use of citizen science program will definitely help a lot in upscaling our efforts. And but I feel like everything just comes down to funding. Funding is usually always a problem. So if we have plenty of fundings, and we'll be there easier. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Apple. Perhaps you can hear from Ms. Carmela.
Sure. To start on the collaboration as well, we are at RLU, we are collaborating with national parks. So we are actually bordering, our area is bordering with the Bukit Tigawal National Park in Central Sumatra. And as we know, right, the wildlife knows no boundary, right? So animals are moving between, you know, a national park and our concession area. So of course, there's a need to ensure that between these two areas, you know, we need to ensure that it's safe for them to move around. We also in cooperation with local university. So we have, for example, Mullah Warman University in Kalimantan did our orangutan study in our concessions. From there we understand, you know, what is in terms of the operation of the company, what is the things that we need to avoid, so not as to, you know, bring risks to these orangutan populations. And we're also working with the community, basically community, not as within the community as within our concession, but also outside the community. Birdpacker is also the one that I mentioned. We also work with them to help us identify, you know, the species that we have in the concessions. So basically, all of the species that you've seen on my slides are all inside the RLU concessions. About the forest rangers, this is a question from Kamel. Basically, you want to start with a small number. You need to understand first what is the threats to your areas, to your forest. We started with, in RLU, we started with understanding where are the access that are used for people to hunt, to deforest, to log the trees, so or cut down the trees. So we started from there. We also need to understand, you know, in terms of the hunting, because hunting and logging, encroachment, they do in a different time periods. So daytime is for, you know, logging, but for hunting, it's mostly occurs at night. So you need to understand, you know, what are the threats that are, you know, happening in your areas. You start from there, start small. There are actually a reference from FAO, which mentioned that for 500 hectare areas, you need to have 1 forest rangers. This is a reference, of course. It doesn't mean that it's perfectly 500 hectares per person in one area. In Kalimantan, because of the scale of the threats is less than what we have in Jambi. So 1 ranger basically patrolling about 900 hectares of area. In Jambi, one ranger approximately patrol 250 hectares areas. So that's about it depends on the threats. What do you have in there? What else? Science, one thing is about social scientists. I think today it's become pretty clear that it's inevitable. It has basically enriching and also contributing, addressing the part that was not being able to address by just ecology science in previous attempts or in previous efforts. So yes, this is a must, it is a need, and more integration. So not just collaboration from different partners, but also collaboration from multidisciplinary approach.
Ms. Abby?
Yeah, so in terms of collaboration, one of the biggest things that we want to do is really to grow this network of wild campuses. There's a lot of opportunity in highlighting campus biodiversity and a lot of significance also because more and more our kids are growing up in very urban environments. And sometimes even parents are not aware that there are pockets of nature that you can expose your children to, even in cities. And so it's very important for us to also work with other schools and other campuses so we can amplify and maximize this effort. And I'm so thrilled to see on Apple's slide that there's an organization on nature positive universities. I'm going to look that up and see if that's something that we can also work with and be part of. And that was just so exciting. But I'm so thrilled that both Apple and Carmilla mentioned citizen science because in itself, citizen science is already collaboration. And we're really so happy to see different members of the community, even our staff and security personnel approach us and say, oh, the peregrine falcon isn't here yet. What is it going to come? And so all of this excitement, because nature is exciting. We were surprised to see that. We thought that Trinket and I were just weird. But when we started reaching out to more of the community members, we did find there was a lot of interest in nature and a lot of interest in getting to know nature even on campus. So really working with others is a great way to accomplish that as well.
Thank you, Ms. Abby. And maybe just to build up on that, you mentioned about getting people interested into nature. Perhaps a synthesis question for all our panelists on communication and perhaps communication I think is the more proper term, but I think ultimately it's convincing. Okay, clearly biodiversity has value, but it is not valued as much. So you touched on it already, everyone touched on it already, but how do we communicate the value of biodiversity to the general public and even the government and funding agencies? Because we know that resources are very important to push for conservation. Maybe it dovetails also to the question for Ms. Carmilla on convincing private company of tourism accommodation to engage with NGO and local community, and to Prof. Apple for collaboration or convincing government to support expansion of study sites. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on communication and convincing people to be on board. Anyone may want to begin?
Maybe I can start this one first. So science communication is so important, especially in the work that all of us do, all three of us do. Our approach with our project is really just storytelling. So we just want to tell stories about these different wildlife and the habitats that they occupy. And we don't want so much to focus on the science alone, although we do, it is important for us to identify the species as much as possible. But we also want to make sure we make a connection through telling that story with culture, with maybe memories from childhood, or just some very personal connection with the organisms and the habitats that we feature. And that works very well for the young community. When it comes to the administration, that's a different story. And it still remains to be a very big challenge in trying to leverage nature value with maybe operations and financial costs. So there's really a lot of competing interests and a lot of trade-offs that you have to also maneuver. and what is feasible and what is doable within your sphere of influence. Also, I'm just a faculty member, and I don't have a lot of influence on the administration. But maybe when we get the community to see why it's important to have all of these nature spaces for campuses, and how being in the presence of trees and living things reduces feelings of stress, anxiety, and anger, even, and increases creativity, etc., then the community puts more value into that. So I'd like to think of us as more of a grassroots kind of project, and hopefully that will trickle up to maybe people who will make decisions and who have better influence over campus management and wildlife management on campus.
Thank you, Ms. Abby. Ms. Carmela?
Yes, completely aligned with what's been mentioned by Ms. Abby. Communication, of course, this is an art, right? To be convincing, we need to understand who the person we are talking to, right? So before we even, tell about, these elephants, Sumatran tigers, and so on, we need to know who is our target audience, right? If you're talking to a group of people living in the cities, right? What are they? We need to know what interests them, right? What do they grow up with? Yeah, to make the connection, as Ms. Abby mentioned, to make the relevance to their personal lives. Talking to the say businessmen, private companies, private sectors. Again, we need to understand what it's in their mind, what are their interests. If they are talking in the numeric language, then we also need to be prepared our communication tools in numeric, as much as possible, gives figures, speaking in the same language is important, so that the message get across, the message get conveyed, as well as with the government. What's the interest of the government? What is the focus of the government? We need to understand. Maybe yesterday government focus on this one, but maybe today it's different. So we also have to understand in terms of the person we are talking to, in terms of the time frame that we are in. So it's again it's an art, and it gets practice to do that. Theory good, but implementation practice is the crucial ones. There's a question on the private sectors and tourism from Fauziana. Thank you. Fortunately, Indonesian government today allow what's so-called multi-business industry, meaning that a concession of one permit can do multiple business. It doesn't have to be. It used to be just one. For example, RLU used to be just allowed only to plant rubber. Now can also be allowed to do something else, agroforestry, tourism as well. So in terms of the regulations, it's there. It's just a matter of implementation. But of course, we need to understand, if we do this tourism, we need to understand the limit that we have to put so that it's not jeopardize our biodiversity. Again, the nature is there for us to enjoy as well. So let's put a focus on that, but of course be mindful of the risk that we might create from this activity.
Thank you. Professor Apple?
So I'll just jump in. Actually, I totally echo what Camilla and Abby just mentioned. So, science communication is always very important, the importance of storytelling, and we are actually learning. We are learning. We have to learn quick so that we can communicate it well. But still, we still have to state the facts, related, for example, to ecosystem goods and services. We human actually benefit from it, but without too much data, not to just spoil the audience. So we need to have wisdom there. So connection is really, really important, because, people always said you will only protect what you love, right? So building connection is very important. So I'd like to take the chance to address some of the quick questions from the chat box that is direct to the marine field, or in general. So there's one question on how can we protect biodiversity from climate change? So I would like to address it in the perspective of what I'm doing, restoration, coral restoration. I would like to state it very clear that restoration is just to buy time, okay? Because we are not actually solving the root cause, so we have to recognize that. So here, what we can do, there are actually a lot of research needs to be done to find ways to enhance coral resilience. For example, there are ideas to breed climate resilient corals. A lot of the methods is still in R&D, and we have to be quick. So I have to make this statement clear that it is not a solution to climate change. Restoration is just to buy time. And Jeffrey actually asked very interesting questions on artificial reef structure, and I would like to address something about something here as well, because among all stresses, climate change, elevated seawater temperature, marine heat waves actually pose the most immediate threats to the survival of corals. So right now, I am sure a lot of you are aware that we are experiencing the fourth global mass bleaching event, coral mass bleaching event. These kind of mass bleaching events usually follows by huge coral mortalities. So we can actually rely on the nature to recover itself. But for places that is not able to recover, we actually have to do something to help. But it really comes down to the sites, because every site is unique, as also been mentioned by Amelia as well. Every site is unique. So what we have to do, we have to understand the site before we act. We can start out something small and then we can upscale from that. If a place has very nice coral natural recruitment, and then it just, for example, it's just a substrate problem, people then explore artificial reef structure, AR. AR may help enhance natural recruitment success and help the reef to recover naturally. AR can also help enhance substrate complexity, actually, and help kickstart the structural complexity, good for biodiversity. But one thing has to be noticed, that artificial reef structure, we also have to look into the cost effectiveness. It has to be supported by scientific data. I also knew that there are available ideas of AR, artificial reefs, that haven't actually taken into account the carbon embodiment, the carbon emission during the manufacture process, which is quite ironic because carbon emission is the cause of climate change in the very first place. So I would say AR can be useful or not useful. If you use it, you have to use it right.
Thank you, Professor Apple. Ms. Carmela, any thoughts?
Yeah, but just to give examples from our areas. So climate change in terms of the terrestrial biodiversity, what we understand from the scientists' reports, that amphibians are actually the most risk group of animals that will be impacted by this climate change. So for this particular reasons, we need to ensure that forests are protected, right? Because other than that, in the forest, when we understand that the forest create microclimates where inside it's more cooler than the outside. So making sure that these systems, these structures are there in the forest, it's already a very good and a very big steps to reduce the risk of impact of the climate change, which is of course not easy to do, but as long as we have the willingness to do, then when we decide to do, then it's the one that counts, that counts. We want to have just to add on that, and we want to have more and more people. We have interest on this issue. Because if there's no interest at all, then we will even not be having this seminar this morning. But how to minimize the different interests, of course, that's the issue here. My personal perspective is that we need to agree on what's the future that we want to create together. What's the future that we want to have, in the next 10 years, in the next couple of decades. What is it? What does it look like? So I think everyone wants to, I believe that we all want to have a good future, a prosperous future, a sustainable future. So having this put into the first part of the conversation, hopefully it will, be able to work on, seeing what is the one common goal we have.
Thank you, Ms. Carmela. Indeed, this conversation on conservation is a step towards a conservation to building the future that we want, the future that we envision for ourselves and for the future generations, of course. So once again, thank you, Ms. Carmela, Professor Apple, and Ms. Abby for joining us today. I'm afraid that's all the time that we have for today. Professor Jatna earlier set the stage of the webinar by giving an overview of the ecosystem services and the threats being faced by our biodiversity. Then we proceeded with our panelists pointing out that despite the looming drivers of biodiversity loss, there are movements towards conservation, and they have been making strides in terrestrial, aquatic, and urban biodiversity promotion. The speakers highlighted the role of citizen science and the need to make the connection of biodiversity in different sectors of the society in order to get the general public and the government engaged in this discussion. Once again, a warm round of virtual applause for all our speakers this morning. Thank you for joining us. At this point, as we draw the webinar to a close, we would like to request you to evaluate today's session by scanning the QR code that you're seeing or using the link provided in the chat. This also links to an e-certificate, the form that you can accomplish to request for an e-certificate. Please follow the social media accounts of SDSN Philippines, SDSN Hong Kong, and SDSN Southeast Asia. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thank you again to Professor Jatna, Ms. Carmela, Professor Apple, and Ms. Abby, and to all our attendees this morning. This has been a conversation on conservation, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining.